Bethesda has certainly been taking their lumps over the past decade. While Fallout 4 had an overall positive reception, it didn't land nearly as strong as Skyrim, scoring lower reviews from both critics and players, and in turn not selling as well. Then there was the disastrous launch of Fallout 76. Beyond people not being pleased with its live service structure and monetization, it was also a technical mess of bugs and glitches, more so than usual for Bethesda games. And although this has been addressed in time, the damage was done when it first came out. Then they took that trip into mobile gaming, releasing Fallout Shelter and Elder Scrolls Blades, which core fans, or at least I'll speak for myself, I just wasn't really that interested. I have heard that they are decent for mobile games, but looking at my phone isn't the type of gaming that I enjoy. And then finally, Bethesda earned the reputation via insult turned meme that all they can do anymore is re-release Skyrim for the 100th time. So yeah, suffice it to say, public perception of the company in recent years has been a little bit less than stellar. Well, after spending the past 2 weeks playing Starfield, I can say that for me, it feels like Bethesda as I knew them back during the Morrowind to Skyrim era, they are back, or at least they have delivered a game that has transported me back to that period of time. Starfield, through and through, is a true Bethesda RPG with all of the exploration, immersion, characters, relationships, adventures, combat, looting, crafting, and world building that you expect. Yes, there are still bugs, although far fewer than normal from what I've seen, and not enough to get in the way of me having a good time. And yes, this might not be the space exploration sim that some are hoping for, with a very liberal fast travel system and little motivation to really ever spend any time in my ship in space. And for sure, the game is not without its issues, which we will talk about in this video. Nevertheless, Starfield is absolutely delivering on being Bethesda's next major RPG. I think this is a fantastic game. I've had an amazing time playing so far. I am 2 weeks in, have finished the campaign, cleared a ton of side content, and yet it still feels like I am just getting going. Much like Morrowind and Skyrim, I think this might go down as one of my all-time favorites and could very well be a game that I'm playing on and off throughout the years. So, let's start off mentioning spoilers. I will avoid any and all major story spoilers outside of talking about the very introduction to the game. I'm not going to say anything about what happens to who, where, or why in the main story of Starfield, but we will be discussing content and mechanics that are unlocked throughout the course of playing, some of which Bethesda has so far kept under wraps. I'm going to talk about this at least lightly in the review because some of these things are a major part of playing the game and the gameplay experience, so they are totally worth mentioning as I talk about my general impressions of Starfield. That said, I will be sure to chapter mark this video, so if there are sections that you want to just dodge completely, you are definitely free to do so. All right, let's get into my review and discussion of Starfield. After 2 whole weeks of playing the game, what is it like, and what do I think so far? Let's start with the beginning. Starfield kicks off in true Bethesda fashion after setting the stage and introducing you to the artifact, which is kind of a driving element of the story, weaving all throughout. You are then asked to make your character. They've got a fairly in-depth creator with lots of options, with sliders for just about every part of the face and body. Then you pick a background. This comes with a little bit of story and 3 related starting skills. Other than whatever dialogue options your background grants you, this choice isn't really game defining. Those skills can be picked up at any point, no matter what you select for your starting background. Eventually, actually, it seems that if you play long enough, you can unlock every single skill in the game. And then there are the traits. These add a bit more flavor, like introvert, which makes it so that you use less oxygen when you are alone, but more if you have a human companion. You could also pick to, for example, be the resident of one of the major cities, or choose to be aligned with a certain faction. All of this granting you better rewards for the thing that you're aligned with, but some drawbacks elsewhere in the game with other factions, cities, or what have you. Quite a few options, both with positives and negative attributes. So once done creating and naming your character, you wake up and then things kick into gear. A group of pirates show up trying to steal your artifact. You fight them back, chat with the survivors, and are given your first ship and told to visit the Space Exploration Group Constellation. Then, after a quick pit stop at a Crimson Fleet base, you head to the city of New Atlantis Atlantis and Alpha Centauri, and from here, things really open up. The main story quest continues, but it's at this point you can just start doing your own thing, venturing off on your own, as is the case with Bethesda RPGs. This is one of the main selling points, just kind of pick a direction and go in terms of what it is you want to do, what you want to explore, what you want to focus on. It really starts here in New Atlantis. You could follow the main path or choose to start chatting with NPCs in town, picking up side quests, exploring nearby planets, maybe join a faction or two, whatever you want to do really. Now, following the main story quest will guide you along and introduce you to the various systems and features at a fairly set pace, as well as a lot of the game's locations, but you can just as well discover all of these things on your own, just through natural exploration, picking up quests along the way, some of which you will start getting in that first city. New Atlantis is a huge location and broken up into several districts, commercial, residential, and transportation being the three main ones, with each of them full of the relevant shops, NPCs, things to do and see. And New Atlantis, along with all of the major cities, has tons of shops that are named with distinct branding, and they've really done a good job here of making these look and feel like actual businesses with their own mottos and vibes to boot. There are general vendors, doctors' offices, trade authorities, security stations, gun and clothing shops, bookstores, and much more to be found in every one of the major cities. As for the NPCs, there are loads of those as well, everywhere. This has to be the most densely populated Bethesda games have been with NPCs in one area, with a mix of named and generic characters walking around, some of them chatting about local events, discussing their day, sharing a story, asking for help, or talking about rumors, many of which, if you overhear, will automatically be added to your quest log. And let's talk about quests. A lot of times in games like these, I prefer the smaller, bite-sized stories and characters, more so than like the overarching grand narrative of the game, the main story quest. And that's really been the case here as well, although I do quite like the main story, especially how it all wraps up. It's the smaller tales along the way that are the most interesting for me. Maybe it's helping a farmer who gets raided by pirates. You go take out the pirates, but then you find a little note that tells you why the pirates were there in the first place, and you go back to confront the farmer because, hey, they were doing some pretty messed up stuff. Or maybe you have to assist a couple who's in a dangerous situation and they need a help getting out of trouble. Maybe you set off on a path of revenge to get payback on a character who screwed you over, and in the process find a treasure hidden under their house. Or maybe following the clues of a note, you discover a hidden base on a far out planet, which used to be the main location of this ancient secret society. Going in there, you find something has taken it over, you deal with that, you discover the discarded gear, ship, and take on the title of the leader of the secret society. Just so much is going on, so many cool little story arches taking you off on one adventure to the next. It does seem, at least thus far from the past 2 weeks of playing this game, that Starfield is loaded with even more of these than any Bethesda title has had, and I love it. Like I said, this side stuff is some of my favorite things in Bethesda games, but in RPGs in general. I do like the main story quest, but I really don't want to talk about it. I don't want to spoil any of it for you, but the side stuff just as equally adore. All right, from here I want to talk more generally about the various aspects of Starfield, and let's start with the exploration. Exploration in Starfield is quite a bit different than what we've seen from prior Bethesda games. In Skyrim, for example, you could just walk in a direction and pretty much be guaranteed to come across something of interest, be it a cave, ruins, a small town, an NPC who's in need of help. Maybe you find a camp with a journal that leads you on a quest, or an entrance to these ancient landmarks. Maybe there's a pathway up to a dragon's nest. But Starfield doesn't quite work like that. There are pre-designated built-out areas, these handcrafted locations, that have all of the level of detail that you expect from Bethesda, but for the most part, you aren't gonna randomly stumble across them because of the scale of this game. Instead, you will be guided to them via quest, main story quest, side quest, faction quest, and quests you pick up from overhearing NPC chatter. Any of these, when in your quest log, are going to give you an objective with a target location on a very particular planet. Tracking the quest will then actually show you exactly what planet and give you the exact landing spot, which will be right next to whatever your quest objective is. So you take off in your ship, maybe you have to jump a few solar systems, and then when you arrive at that quest location, you're gonna land right next to the objective, and it is going to be every bit of Bethesda that you expect. You will go into whatever that location is, a base, a cave, what have you, and it is going to be very detailed with lots of loot to pick up, puzzles to solve, books to read, enemies to fight, new quests to discover in inside of the quest location, some Easter eggs, everything that you have come to expect from these mainline Bethesda RPGs are in these locations. But outside of those spots, every single planet that I've seen is built like this. Upon landing your spaceship, whether you were landing because you just chose a landing spot or you were landing at a pre-designated point of interest, once you land, there will be somewhere around 3 to 5 unknown points of interest scattered around you. Now you can bring up your scanner, and when scanning those unknown areas, it's then going to generally tell you what it is, be it a building or a science facility, a cave, or maybe some area that has signs of life. Now you can head towards those points of interest, and along the way, you might see 1 or 2 small structures here and there, but for the most part, the entire play space when you're planet side on any of the game's planets is predominantly just terrain. There will be some ore to harvest every few 50 to 100 meters, and then maybe there will also be some plants or animals, although that is depending on how hospitable the planet is. Unlike the Elder Scrolls or Fallout, Starfield is not a game where it's possible that you're going to stumble onto really interesting things or things of note in every square inch of the play space. No, all of the places worth being are pretty much going to be marked on the map when you land, or you will be guided there, like I mentioned, by a quest. That is a big difference, for better and worse, from how exploring the world has traditionally worked in Bethesda's games. Now, with that said, they have said that Starfield has more handcrafted content and locations than any of their prior titles, and after the past 2 weeks of playing, I am totally inclined to believe it. I have seen a lot of areas, a lot of points of interest, a lot of quests, but it also feels like I've just barely scratched the surface. There is clearly a ton of handcrafted content to explore in Starfield. It's just that on top of that, there is even more of what is mostly empty terrain that's just full of 3 to 5 points of interest, and maybe plants and animals. From what I've seen, Starfield, yes, is every bit as detailed as every other Bethesda RPG. It's just that instead of all of that being like in one confined play space, it's way more spread out with much more filler in between, as is probably expected when they've got some 1,000 planets to fill. So just bear that in mind. Whereas in Fallout or in Skyrim, every single square inch, more or less, could be full of something interesting, it's a lot different in Starfield because we're dealing with 1,000 planets, and there's a lot of empty space in between the more interesting locations. Now, in terms of variety of locations, there is quite a lot. Just about every biome type you can imagine is here in Starfield amongst those 1,000 or so planets. Wetlands, deserts, forests, jungles, volcanic, Arctic. They've got everything, it seems. And the explorable points of interest within those locations are made up of all of those aforementioned things like caves, facilities, ruins, abandoned outposts, lots of variety, lots of interesting things, and lots of empty space as well in between. Speaking of which, I do want to briefly touch on complaints about the zone boundaries that I've seen pop up. So basically, if you haven't seen these online, people are talking about the fact that when you land, there is like a proximity with which you can explore, and if you make it all the way to the edge of that, the game tells you, hey, you've made it to the barrier, and you have to go back in your ship and land elsewhere if you want to continue exploring by foot. Let me say this. I have not once in the past 2 weeks of playing the game naturally ever come across a zone boundary while on a planet. I went in to do it for the sake of testing, just to see what it was like, but had I not read about this online, I still wouldn't know that it was even a thing, because at no point in the last 2 weeks of just playing the game has it made any sense for me to land and walk straight in one direction nonstop for 20 minutes. My typical time while on a planet would look like this. Typically, I would be going there because I would have some sort of quest, main story, side quest, faction, or otherwise. That puts me, like I mentioned, right next to a point of interest. So I would land at that spot, and then I would do whatever the quest was asking me to. Take out a target, discover something, collect something. So I go in there, I do that, and typically the average quest would take me maybe 15 to 20 minutes to upwards of an hour, depending on how expansive the area was or how much looting I chose to do. So I would do the quest objective, finish it up, and then after that, sometimes I would emerge and scan my surroundings to mark one of those nearby points of interest, and then maybe I would visit 1 or 2 of those, but normally that was it, because at that point it would be time to teleport back to my ship and leave the planet, either because I was headed towards my next quest, or I needed to go back to town to sell off my inventory, pick up some new quests, progress the main story, whatever. But yeah, as mentioned, in 2 weeks of playing, I didn't even realize zone boundaries were a thing, but it's not because I wasn't playing the game a ton, because I have finished the campaign, I've done a ton of side stuff, I've played a lot of Starfield. It just never makes sense because outside of those points of interest, the planets are basically nothing. They're just like plants and resources and maybe animals, and there's no reason to just land and walk 30 minutes. Now, if that is what you want to do, and if you wanted to spend, I mean, you could easily spend 50 to 100 hours on a single planet if you were trying to go all the way around it. I just never did that naturally in the course of playing the game, but I understand that some people are going to be upset about that they can't just land and walk for 5 straight hours. You can only land and walk for 40 minutes before they make you take off and land again. So it's pretty much a major non-issue for me personally, at least for how I have been playing the game. But people play games differently. And for the people who wanted to land and walk for 5 hours straight, yeah, I can understand why that might be frustrating. Speaking of walking for 5 hours straight, let's talk about travel. So yes, this game does have spaceships, but no, I don't really spend a lot of time in them. I mean, I do technically as I'm moving from one location to the next. I am technically having to be in my ship. I'm not actually playing it most of the time because they let you teleport instantly pretty much everywhere in this game. If there's an area that you have previously discovered, you can teleport there. If there's a star system within range of your ship's jump drive, you can teleport there. The amount of time that I've spent actually in space physically piloting my ship over these past 2 weeks, I want to say is somewhere around 30 to 60 minutes, definitely not more than an hour. Now, you could spend a lot more time up there. There are things to do. You can fly around to derelict stations. You can find enemies to have dogfights with. There are cargo ships that you can hail down and board. There's lots of things you could do while in space. I've just not had much reason to because of the fact that they let you fast travel for nearly everything, including flight from one planet to the next. You don't actually even have to physically walk back to your ship. I can, and many times have, been on the planet, finished a quest, then just opened my map, clicked on one of the major cities a few solar systems over, and if that wasn't within the range of my ship's capabilities, I just get a loading screen and then I arrive at my destination. No walking back to the ship necessary, and no taking off in orbit, no flying through space needed. There are exceptions depending on the distance, and for many of the populated planets, the ones with major cities, they are going to require to quickly scan your cargo, checking for stolen goods before they let you land. But even in that case, I don't actually have to fly my ship. I just leave the loading screen. I'm in orbit of the planet. They say scanning your cargo. 5 seconds later, cargo scanned. I open the map. I click land in the city, and there you go. I haven't actually spent time like flying the ship around. Now, as with the planet side exploration, I definitely know for some people this is going to be a negative, but it personally did not bother me. In fact, I actually appreciated it given how massive this game is. 1,000 planets. Those planets are huge. You could spend 100 hours on them if you wanted to, walking around. I don't want to spend most of my time manually flying around. I just want to do the Bethesda stuff. I want to walk around town, talking to the interesting NPCs, getting the storylines, finding secrets, sneaking into buildings, going out on adventures through caves and camps, and fighting and looting along the way, following these storylines. And if that's what you want to focus on like I do, they let you do this with relative ease without the traveling from one end of the galaxy to another being a major impediment. They might ask you to make 2 or 3 solar system jumps, but that's just a few clicks and not really a big time investment. I would say the biggest drawback for this is it does pull you a bit out of the immersion, but on the flip side, the good news is at least when it comes to the planet side exploration, you can use the fast travel as much or little as you like. Like, you don't have to fast travel from one planet to the next. You can, if nothing else, but for the sake of immersion, you can, when you finish your quest, walk back to your ship, physically get in the cockpit, physically take off, and then while in orbit, choose from that point which planet you want to go to next. It's just, you don't have to do that, but they definitely are very liberal with fast travel, almost to a fault in this game. Now let's talk about looting and loot. Loot is everywhere in every one of those major points of interest in the game. Every major location, quest location or otherwise, will be loaded with all manner of loot to collect. Loot in the game is broken up into 11 categories. There is the armor sections. These include spacesuits, packs, helmets, and other apparel, combat gear like the weapons, throwables, ammo, and aids, and then other, which include notes, books, resources, and miscellaneous. Now, for all the different armor categories, they will have values of various defensive stats and resistances, along with potential bonus modifiers. So the gear in this game will have different rarities that can drop from white to blue, purple, and yellow. The higher the rarity, the more number of perks. So white will have none, blue will have 1, purple 2, and yellow 3. These can range from offensive, defensive to to utility in nature, all of the standard RPG stuff. Maybe you get extra damage against a certain enemy type, or extra defenses, or more efficient O2 use, extra body shot damage, extra all sorts of RPG bonuses here. And weapons work much in the same way. All of the variety of weapons you expect, from rifles to shotguns to SMGs to energy weapons. These will come with different stats, different fire speeds and accuracies and bonuses, all sorts of different attachments that you can change with and modifiers that you can do. And weapons like the armor will come with higher rarities, with those higher rarities having additional perks attached to them. The loot that drops in the game from random enemies or chests or things that you might randomly find on the ground will be some random roll of stats and rarity of all of the different types of armor and weapons that are in the game. But on top of that, there are named unique items, these special items often found at the end of a quest line, or from a particular faction reward, or from joining a faction, or maybe some found in specific secret locations, or from progressing parts of the main story. And yes, the game does have a max storage capacity. This is something that can be improved with the game's talent system. You can up your total capacity, but you'll spend a lot of time juggling, hey, I want to pick everything up, but hey, I don't have enough space in my inventory. In terms of the game's combat, playing the game, this is, as far as I'm concerned, the best combat has ever felt in a Bethesda game. The gunplay in particular, while it might not be quite as good as something like a dedicated AAA FPS like Destiny or Halo, it is nevertheless quite good. I think it feels so good that I've spent most of my time playing that way. I do think the shooting, they've done a really good job with the feel of first-person combat. Melee combat felt a little wonkier, but in general, shooting guns, which is your main weapon of choice in this game, feels really good, especially in first person. I didn't like it quite as much in third person, because when you're in third person, your character has momentum to them. So as you're trying to like strafe left and right, they slow down, they physically slow down, but you can really do that quick left and right strafing while in first person perspective. In terms of the rest of the gameplay, interacting with the world, jumping around, it's the same physics-based craziness that you come to expect from Bethesda games, and I say that in an endearing manner. Skills and talents, this game has them. There are actually 5 categories of skills: physical, social, combat, science, and tech. For physical, this centers around things like unarmed attacks, defenses, your carry capacity, and movement capabilities, including jumping. Social is like dialogue, NPC interaction, NPC manipulation, and thievery. Combat is all focused on ranged weapons and explosives. Science is things like resource gathering, research, outpost, and crafting. And then finally, tech includes enhancements for your ship as well as your booster backpack. Each one of these categories has about 16 to 17 individual talents. You play the game, you get experience, this levels you up. Every level up, you get a skill point. You spend a skill point, and then once you have selected the first tier in any one of these, there will be a challenge for you to complete, which is usually just use this thing frequently. Once you use it X number of times, or you complete whatever the specific challenge is, you can then progress to the second tier with an additional skill point. Now, this next part is a bit spoilery because it's something that you unlock as you move through the main campaign, but I cannot not mention it. Also, this was teased in one of the trailers for the game, so it's not going to be a complete surprise. But yes, space magic is in the game. Starfield has what essentially amounts to what Skyrim shouts were. They're called powers, and it works nearly exactly the same way as shouts did in Skyrim. You have to physically go to a location that unlocks the power, and then when you do so, you now have access to a brand new special ability. You've got this resource that will slowly recharge over the course of like 5 to 10 seconds. Different powers have different strengths and use different amounts of those total resources, making them more or less spammable while in combat. These include things like teleportation, X-ray vision, gaining shields, reflecting projectiles. There's an anti-gravity space magic ability. There's even the ability to pacify enemies. Looks like there's around 24 total of these powers in the game. So far, I have only unlocked 9. I just haven't bothered chasing down the rest of them. And of the 9 that I have, I'm pretty happy with the abilities that my character has. I mostly use the teleport. If I'm in densely populated enemy areas, I'll swap to X-ray vision or shields. Sometimes I use the pacify. There's also one that like gives you a personal oxygen bubble. So if you're in a space where your oxygen is quickly depleting, or like if you're over encumbered and you're trying to run, that can be a great option. These are really, really cool, make a big difference. And I'm so happy that the game has space magic. I think they've done a really good job with this. Now let's move on to talking about a few of the other systems in the game. Spaceships for one, there's a big variety of these. These range from fighters all the way up to cargo ships and everything in between. There's even special special unique ships. These will be unlocked through quest lines or things that you discover while playing the game. Ships will have all sorts of different components and parts, but most importantly, and of note, they do have a cargo hold, which basically is what amounts to your portable storage that you take with you on the go. This is of great usefulness while out in the field. As you play and discover or purchase new ships, you'll then unlock the ability to swap your home ship. So if you find an upgrade or one that has more storage or is faster or has better offenses, whatever it is, you can choose whatever ship you want active at any given time. And also the ships have loads of customization. You can swap out all of the major parts, you can upgrade components, you can move sections of the ship around. There's a lot of potential customization here. I didn't really dive into it that much because I was happy with the ships that I have. In particular, I found a ship through a quest line, a really unique ship, and I really like it just the way that it is. Other than swapping out and upgrading some parts, I was happy with its just general layouts. But yes, you can mix and match and make all sorts of potential combinations for your ships, which is really, really cool to see, and I'm looking forward to diving into it. Companions are in the game as you play, interact, and build relationships with particular NPCs. Some of them will unlock the ability to be added to your crew and join you as a companion. With this, they can follow you out into the field, helping you in combat, acting as another portable storage beyond your ship's cargo, and you can basically put them to work either on your ship or in your outpost, tasking them with various jobs depending on their particular perks. Speaking of outposts, the game does have base building. You can place these outposts on pretty much any planet, anywhere in the entire game. From there, you're able to build out various structures, crafting facilities, and even defenses, and these likely work as good base of operations, or at least I assume so, because sort of like ship customization, I haven't really spent a lot of time with the base building. I've just been focused on everything else, on doing the quest, on exploring, looting, leveling up. I haven't spent a lot of time building a base. Also, the base building requires resources. These are the things that you collect while out planet side, getting various minerals and ores and all of that, and then you use that to build up the various components of your base. Sort of like ship customization, I'm also looking forward to getting into this. This is what I'm talking about when I say I've been playing for 2 weeks and it still feels like I've barely scratched the surface. Last but not least, with the general overview of this game, let me tell you about New Game Plus. Now, this is a bit spoilerly, so if you want to skip this section, go to those timestamp chapter markers below. And the game has New Game Plus. I won't tell you exactly what events bring you to it, but I will tell you the end game eventually gives you the choice of staying in the universe that you are or starting over, but not completely from scratch. You're going to lose much of your belongings, all of your items, your resources, your currency, your gear. You lose all of that, but you carry your progression over with you and are able to, in the same save, basically start a new game while also unlocking some new options and having a different take on the experience. It is very, very cool from a story perspective and from a gameplay perspective. I don't remember who, but someone at Bethesda at one point said that the game doesn't really start until you finish the campaign, and I kind of get where they're coming from after finishing the campaign. The way that they do New Game Plus and the way that it ties into the main narrative of the game, I think it's really, really, really cool. Okay, so to wrap it up, I want to go over my bad and good final takeaways. When it comes to the bad, I think moving away from that one cohesive world to explore and replacing it with scale that is mostly filler in between, it's definitely a lot less immersive, at least for the totality of the experience in the play space, especially when combined with how liberal they are with fast travel. I almost wish they had been slightly more restrictive with how much they let you travel around and had a slightly more condensed experience, but they're trying to deliver a galaxy scale of a game with thousands of planets divided amongst tons of solar systems. Obviously, filler is needed in between. I think they do a good job with how they handle the balancing the interesting points of interest and quest locations and then filling out the space with just randomness, basically, with just resources and terrain. I do think it in terms of while playing the game, it doesn't feel like I'm dealing with a bunch of nothingness because I can so quickly hop around, but it definitely makes the whole experience and exploring a little less interesting and cohesive because, yeah, for example, in Skyrim, if I just headed north, I was going to come across all sorts of really interesting stuff as I kept on moving, and it's not really that way in Starfield. Also, in terms of the bad, there have been some bugs, the least that I've seen in any Bethesda game at release, but occasionally I've seen things like items glitching out, spinning at like 1,000 miles an hour and bouncing stuff off of inside of a room. I've seen a few NPCs glitch into walls here and there. All in all, it's been pretty good, but yes, there are still some bugs present. And on the visual side of things, I would say this game is very mixed. Sometimes I think Starfield looks awesome, the environmental stuff, the lighting. Other times it feels very flat and incredibly washed out. I think this is part of the trade-off with them still using a creation engine. Even if it is upgraded, it is still clearly the creation engine. To that note, NPC faces, they're a bit better than they've been in the past, but still feels like a creation engine NPC talking at me and its head following me as I move around in the creepy way that it does. And also, while generally I like the range combat, I did think the melee in this game didn't feel particularly great. That's the bad, the major of the bad. Onto the good. I was not expecting to like this game very much. The sci-fi space setting isn't typically my favorite. I much enjoy fantasy. I like the Elder Scrolls series for that very reason, but I gotta tell you, I am obsessed with this game. This is just such a great world that they've built. I will definitely be playing for months, if not years potentially, at least on and off. It's really hooked me for sure. There's so much game here. As stated, 2 weeks in, I feel like I've still just barely gotten going. The gameplay overall is as good as it's ever been for a Bethesda game, and given the scale and clockwork nature, I think they've done a great job of delivering what feels like solid FPS action. The characters, the cities, the technology, all of the world feels very grounded with, you know, the sci-fi magic power stuff aside. This does feel like a very believable universe. Performance has been really solid. There's only been a few instances where I noticed frame drops. Other than that, I've been hovering around 100 plus FPS on PC. Bugs, while present, like I mentioned, have been few and far between. And bottom line is that this game is very fun and definitely feels like a step forward for Bethesda RPGs, and also has me that much more excited for the next Elder Scrolls installment. And to wrap everything up, I want to say that over the past couple weeks of playing and working on the review for this game, I would periodically just jump online to check up on and see what people were saying about Starfield, especially when I noticed a lot of those leaks were coming out and people started sharing and in some cases showing off aspects of the game. I was just generally wondering, like, how's the temperature? What do people think of what they've seen so far? And it seemed like all I came across were constant complaints. Nearly every single post, every single thread, every single article that I read was just majorly negativity. Every single time I would be like playing the game all day and I'd jump on Twitter at the end of the day to be like, hey, what are people saying about Starfield, right? I know embargo's not lifted, but from what they've seen from the leaks or from general discussion, from interviews, what do people think about Starfield? And I'd be like, oh, damn, that sounds awful. They're making this game sound like trash. Anyway, I'm going to go back to playing Starfield now because the game is a lot of fun. Overall, the complaints aside, the negatives, the criticism aside, I think they nailed most of this game. It is an easy recommendation for me. If you've ever liked Bethesda games in the past, almost certainly you are going to like this one. At least I do personally. That is going to do it for the review. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.